Thanks for coming, and I hope this is an informative discussion we've got going on here today. This event is being sponsored by the Public Policy Witness Ministry, which is part of the Presbytery of the James. And our ministry has a two-pronged focus. One has been sensible gun laws, and now we've added to that the criminal justice reform. And today we're talking solely about criminal justice reform. And with an eye toward the Virginia Assembly coming up, General Assembly coming up in January. We have with us today Lauren Ramseur, and she's a member of our Presbytery and also of the Public Policy Witness Ministry. And she serves a church in Bon Air, the Bon Air Juvenile Corrections Center. And she's going to talk to us about her experience serving and working with incarcerated youth. And she will be our window into life at the center. And then Valerie Slater is our other speaker for this event. Valerie works with Rise for Youth. And Rise is a nonpartisan organization seeking to dismantle the youth prison model and replace it with a system that positively impacts a young person's life. So the idea is that rather than punishment, it sees as its mission to encourage growth and success in the juvenile justice system. Before coming to Rise for Youth, Valerie worked as a juvenile justice attorney with legal aid, and so she's definitely not new to this topic. Hopefully Valerie can give us some ideas as to how individuals and church congregations might further the cause of juvenile justice reform. And then finally, I am not introducing Jamar Boyd. He was supposed to be with us today representing Virginia Interfaith Center, but he no longer works for Vic. And he just took a position in Chicago. So we wish him well in his new position in Chicago. Lauren, so since Jamar is not with us, Lauren and I will try to at least say a few brief words about what the Virginia Interfaith Center has penned as issues facing our state in the area of juvenile justice reform. And this also concerns housekeeping a little bit. Kelly, as Kelly mentioned earlier, we will be taking questions, and I hope that we can leave space after Lauren and then again after Valerie speaks for questions. And also you're feel free to use the chat feature in our Zoom conversation if you'd rather not speak. I think that covers it. So let us begin with prayer. O Holy One, lean out a window of heaven and bless us as we gather together today to discuss how we might serve you better through criminal justice reform. Guide our thoughts, move among us, creating an atmosphere of respect and concern. Give us new insights. Breathe into us energy to do your work. This we ask through Jesus Christ, your Son, our Lord. Amen. Okay, Lauren.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. As Kay said, I'm Reverend Lauren Ramseur, and I'm a co-pastor along with my colleague, Reverend Ashley Diaz-Mejias, who's also on the call today. We're the co-pastors of the Voices of Jubilee, and we're a new worshiping community of our Presbytery, and our ministry is in relationship with youth who are incarcerated at the Bon Air Juvenile Correctional Center, which is in Bon Air, just south side of Richmond, Virginia. And that's where all of the youth who have been sentenced to a term of months or years through the judicial process in Virginia are housed. to serve that time and receive education and services. Then if they still have a longer sentence to serve when they turn 21, then they are moved to an adult facility. This has been a very difficult time at Bonaire since COVID. They had the largest outbreak of COVID in any juvenile facility in the country early in 2020. And the center is still on some level of lockdown, not allowing any outside visitation. Since COVID began early in 2020, youth have had very limited access to their families, and all of the programming and education has been really limited. They've been focused in pods and have spent a lot of that time in solitary confinement. And solitary confinement is one of the issues that we're talking about today. One of the things that we have found, we've been at the center in and out. Our ministry really is about crossing the border, because we are a ministry. We're not attached in any way to the Bonaire Juvenile Correctional Center. That is just who we are in relationship with, the youth there. And so we present at this border between liberation and incarceration. And we, through our experience there, and both Ashley and I's experience working in prisons and in these issues for decades, we've really come to understand that our prison system is a primary embodiment of structural racism in our community today. And it is the ongoing and terrible legacy of slavery that is embodied in this system. And so we feel deeply passionate to join with Rise for Youth and other partners who are really building a different way of understanding what happens when violence happens, and how we can handle violence and harm differently, instead of continuing to perpetuate these systems. It has been a hard year because we have not been able to get in. And so talking about solitary confinement and what's happening in our prisons is really, really important. I think it is very highly underreported how much solitary confinement is used. In COVID, it's been used a lot for protecting the youth. They've been in solitary a lot as a means of medical protection. The other thing that we found really being at this intersection of coming in and out of the prison is that as people of faith, if we seek to be in the company of Jesus, and as he promised us in Matthew 25, that is where we meet him over and over again on the border work, doing the work of liberation, resisting and transforming these systems of death. It's where we continue to meet Jesus and the Holy Spirit doing resurrection work. So that's what gives us joy and enthusiasm to continue going back and to be with our youth. We are really excited to have the opportunity to be with Valerie today, because Rise for Youth has really been one of our important partners. As we began this ministry, we knew that very quickly that we could not just be in individual relationship with the young people, but we had to be really working to transform the system and build the beloved community. And one of the great leaders in our movement is Valerie Slater. And what I've loved so much about working with her is that she is a powerful voice and as an attorney and an advocate, but her focus is always on lifting the voices of the youth who are impacted by the juvenile justice system, lifting the youth's voices and their families' voices to the center of the conversation. And she and her team work diligently to empower the youth themselves and their families to speak and to lead for their own future. So I'm really looking forward to hearing from you, Valerie, and how we can support the work you're doing and walk alongside of you.
Thank you so much, Lauren. We are so excited to have the Voices of Jubilee to be partners with Lauren and with Ashley as they are working inside the facility. If I just kind of pedal back my experience just a little bit further, Gay, you're right. I was a juvenile justice attorney at Illegal Aid Justice Center, but even before that, I was at the Disability Law center of Virginia, where I was an advocate in the Children's Advocacy Unit and spent a lot of time in both Bonaire, and Beaumont was still open at the time. And so, Lauren, the way you are describing the experiences of young folks on the inside, and just recognizing that their voices are so often silenced, the things that they need are so often ignored, and they are being told how things are going to go rather than being given the opportunity to express what their true needs are and then have those needs met. And so it has been almost an evolution for me of, kind of looking and seeing what's going on and how help needs to, how we need to support young folks. But then the Lord literally just opening different doors for me to be able to move into those positions and open those doors so that young people themselves can be ushered in to speak their own truth, for families to be able to lift up their own challenges, and then for legislators to have to listen. It isn't an advocate saying this and that. It's a family member saying, this was my child's lived experience. This was my experience as I attempted to support my young person, and recognizing that these aren't isolated instances, but rather the trend as it relates to young people who are incarcerated or who find themselves heading down that trajectory. So I want to share a little bit about the Rise for Youth legislative agenda first. So if I can just share with you the items that we are finding the most pressing and why. So the very first thing that we are wanting to do is to transfer the Department of Juvenile Justice out of the Secretary of Public Safety and Homeland Security and have it relocated to the Secretary of Public Health and Human Resources. When we say public safety and Homeland Security, it draws a very stark picture, right? That's where we are dealing with folks who are a terrorist threat to the Commonwealth. That's where DOC is housed. And when we're talking about young people, we should not be using the same terminology that we talk about threats to the safety as we would use to talk about our children. We need to recognize that children, first of all, that their brains are not as developed as an adult's. So we should not even consider, when a child has caused harm, we should not look at them as if they are just miniature adults and we will just use that same punitive system. In the same way we discipline and correct our children, we should use that same model of correcting children who have caused harm so that they are able to learn and grow from the mistakes that they have made and from the harms that they have caused. And they are able to then develop new pathways, new ways to deal with their own issues, when they are in need of access to things, whatever it is that a child needs, and however it is that they are erring in the way that they're attempting to satisfy that need. We need to begin to make sure that we are providing pathways to positive development, positive meeting of needs, and a positive rehabilitation for every child. And so the only way to truly do that is if we would house the Department of Juvenile Justice along with every child serving agency in the Commonwealth, and that's in Health and Human Resources. In having conversations with both the Department of Juvenile Justice and the agencies that provide services to youth, they talk often about the need for the services of those other agencies and how difficult it is for the Department of Juvenile Justice to get those services to the young folks who are incarcerated because those agencies are housed in different secretaries. We need to remove every barrier for children who have the greatest risk and who have the greatest needs. Why would we allow barriers to exist to rehabilitation? And so I'm wondering, Kelly, if you could put up the document that says transfer the Department of Juvenile Justice from Public Safety to the Public Health Secretary, because there are some very concrete reasons that that transition needs to happen. So right now we have this whole punitive system, and that punitive system is not serving our children. It's not creating the opportunity for them to be rehabilitated. And we have got to stop that. The only way we're going to stop it is to make sure that they have access to every service. And how do we make access to services available? We transfer the Department of Juvenile Justice. We move away from punitive and we embrace rehabilitation. Because when we look at the young people who are incarcerated, for every year that they spend in youth prison, the probability for being rearrested, it increases by nearly a third. And so when young folks are released from Bon Air, at the 3-year mark, the reconviction rate is 73.5%. Let that sink in. We are supposed to be rehabilitating children, but we have a 73% rate of reconviction. That means not only are we not rehabilitating, but in 3 years, if the average age for a young person who was incarcerated is between 16 and 17 years old, in 3 years, we're just ushering them into the DOC system. So not only have we not rehabilitated children, we have allowed them to now become adults who are now just feeding into the adult system. We have got to stop this trend. And the way to do that is to ensure that we are treating children as children, recognizing the public health crises of justice system involvement, and addressing the root causes of problems rather than the symptom, which is the behavior that lands children in trouble to begin with. So that next point, youth engagement and criminal behavior, it often stems from living in environments that are profoundly overburdened with lack. So if more than half of all of the reasons that children are in prison right now, 50.4%, they're all stealing crimes. It's larceny, burglary, and robbery. That means that children are taking things, and it's either because they need them or they want them. And when you live in lack long enough, and as a child especially, if no one is showing you how to get your needs met, if you never get that thing that you want. I can remember as a child, there were times when I was able to just go to my parents and say, you know what, I really want such and such. And I might not get it right away, but eventually I got some of the things that I want. Imagine the child that lives in lack, constant lack, right? And in constant need. If over half of the children that are incarcerated are stealing, then we need to do something to address that issue. And then the next highest after we eliminate the stealing crimes, then it's assault. So now we're talking about children who are acting out and do not know appropriate ways to handle their anger. So if stealing and assault are the highest two, then that means we've got some work to do in community. And it's health, the health secretary, where every other child serving agency is housed. That's how we're going to be able to provide children with what they need. Some communities, overwhelmingly communities of color, those are the communities that are dealing with limited access to robust education. The jobs that parents and children have, they're the low wage jobs, barely a living wage, if at all. And then if you're working part-time, you don't have access to healthcare. So then we've got that to add to the issue. And I mean, we could just go on and on with all of the ways that children are being underserved or not served at all. And then as of 2020, over 90% of the youth incarcerated, they required some mental health services, and over 70%, they demonstrated significant symptoms of mental health disorder. I mean, so I hope that what I am sharing is helping everyone to understand that we are talking about a health crisis that needs to be dealt with as such. And the public health secretary, where every other child serving agency is housed, is the only way to appropriately address children who are experiencing a health crisis. We cannot allow for our young people to be treated as if they are mini adults, because they are not. Their brains are not fully developed. Their behaviors should be treated as they need to be corrected and new pathways created so that they understand appropriate ways to address whatever they're dealing with. But there also needs to be a wrapping around of communities that are experiencing such great lack and making sure that those needs are met. When we begin to take a holistic approach to providing children with what they need, to supporting communities and creating wealth rather than lack, then we will see a transitioning of the way our children are behaving, and there will be less children in the system to begin with. And so I'm really hopeful that everyone will take the time to just really look at this document that talks about all of these points and reasons why we should transition the Department of Juvenile Justice into the department from the Public Safety and Homeland Security Secretary into the Public Health Secretary, and that you will indeed support this when we head into the 2022 General Assembly session. So now, looking at our the rest of our priorities, you know, we talked about the Bonaire Juvenile Correctional Center. That youth prison houses over 200 and can house over 270 young people at a time, and it was modeled after an adult prison. And so even though there has been some great work to really kind of shift the programming, shift the way things are happening, when you're living in an environment that treats you like a prisoner, that looks like a prison, you know, sometimes there is a dissonance between where you live and the services that you're receiving. We have got to do away with adult modeled prisons for children. So we would like to see 30 beds or less facilities that are central to the communities where children are coming from. And so the community members are able to take care of their own children. Families will no longer be separated from their youth. The majority of the young people, approximately 40%, come from the Hampton Roads region. And family members, if they're able to come at all, are traveling hours to come and see their children. But if the facility is small and it's within the community, then parents can remain and the rest of the support network can remain contributing members to their child's rehabilitation. And that's what we need. We need communities that are most plagued with all of the social ills that I was talking about earlier. They should be the ones that are supporting their young folks. One of the first things the Department of Juvenile Justice has said when they are looking to build a new facility, they will go into a rural community and say, we are going to bring economic growth to your community. We're going to build this facility and we're going to provide jobs. There are going to be so many services that are going to be needed inside this facility. And all of these positions, all of these new openings will be filled by the individuals from your community. Well, that's the conversation that needs to be had with the communities where kids are coming from, not rural communities that don't look like them, not rural communities where these children are not coming from. And so that's why we advocate for small, local, and staffed by the community members of the young folks that will be receiving these rehabilitative services within those facilities. And so that's why we are asking for the Healthy Community Secure Care facility to be built within local communities. And that's a piece of legislation that we will once again bring back. It was introduced by Delegate Ward and Senator Locke in 2020. It was incorporated into the juvenile justice study that Jay Lark is completing now and will be presenting to the General Assembly during this 2022 session. And with their recommendations, we're hopeful that they're going to be aligned with what we have already put forward. But even if they're not, we're prepared to continue to fight for families and communities to be able to support their own young folks. We're also advocating for the elimination of the use of the valid court order exception. So I don't know how many of you understand what that is, but ultimately when a child finds themselves in trouble, with the law, and they are before a judge, before a court, a tribunal, then that judge may put them on probation or some other level of supervision. And that judge is going to write an order, a court order, that's going to say things like, you must go to school, you must never miss curfew, obey your parents, do your homework. All of these different stipulations may be put into a court order, and that child, in order to get off probation, or in order to get off of supervision, must abide by those orders for a certain period of time. If that young person violates one of those orders, one of those stipulations, then that judge has the authority to lock that child up for 7 days. And so kids are being locked up for 7 days for reasons that are not criminal. At best, they're status offenses, meaning it's criminal only by nature of the child's age, or under the age of 18 or under the age of 21. Therefore, this is a criminal offense. But oftentimes, it's not even that. You've just violated the court order, and it wouldn't be criminal at all, but for the fact that you are under some level of supervision of the court. We want to get rid of that. Kids ought not be incarcerated. Jail should not be a place that we are using to teach children a lesson. It's wrong, and we must stop it. The Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention, that is the national or the federal agency that gives each state money if they will abide by certain stipulations. One of the stipulations is to stop locking up status offenders. That's what the valid court order exception does. It locks up status youth who have committed an offense by nature of their age. And so the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention, they created what's called the valid court order exception, because jurisdictions were saying, oh, well, what about this? And coming up with different reasons why they felt it was indeed appropriate to use incarceration as a tool. And so OJJDP, they created this exception, but the majority of the states have stopped using it. There are only 8 states now, Virginia being one of them, that continue to use it. And unfortunately, Virginia has locked up more than 100 children every year for the last 3 years. Even during the pandemic, they were still using very heavily this valid court order exception to lock up children. And we need to just eliminate it, because there are better ways to encourage children to do what they need to do without using jail as a punishment, because that's all it is. We're not talking about children who have committed crimes. We're talking about kids who have run away from home. Well, what's going on in that home that child might be running away? Children who have skipped school. Well, what kind of supports are necessary for a child so that they will attend school? And so understanding that we are locking up children for things that are not crimes, we have got to stop that practice, because it's harmful. We do not want to demystify jail for children. We ought to, but by all means necessary, guard them from that culture, not usher them into it because they didn't go to school or because they missed curfew. Another of our priorities is eliminating the fines and fees associated with being involved in the justice system. I don't know how many of you know this, but it costs more for a family if their child is involved with the court system. If you live in a poor community, it costs more than if you live in an affluent community. I mean, literally, the fees associated. So, you have to pay court costs. You will potentially pay a fee from the clerk's office, all of these different fines and fees that are associated with just being involved. It literally costs more if you are from a poor community. And so if we do not have a set fee system across the Commonwealth, we shouldn't be charging families anyway when their children get in trouble it should not be all of a sudden a punishment on a parent who is now going to have to pay some fines and fees simply for having used the system. And then we aren't even fair in the way we use those fees. So we should just eliminate them altogether. We were successful in removing the necessity of families to pay child support to the state last year, 2021 session. Delegate Hope was the patron, and it was family members that made us aware. During the pandemic, we had created a safe space for family members to talk together and just kind of support each other. And one of the things that we learned listening in was that family members were having to pay child support to the state when their child was incarcerated. And so we took this information that we learned and we found a patron and created the opportunity for young folks and family members to advocate and to say, hey, stop charging us child support. And we were able to eliminate it. And so now we want to go after the rest of the fines and fees and just eliminate this pay the state for our children's being involved in the system. We want to get rid of it altogether. The next priority that we want to do is we want to get rid of the ability for police to lie to young people during interrogation. There are criminal penalties associated with children lying to the police or with anyone lying to the police. It's called perjury. But however, the police are able to tell whatever lie they would like to try to get a child to admit to some things. You know, oftentimes, a theory of a case has been developed based on what information the police may have learned from one source, and they will take that and they will attempt to create that scenario and then get a child to agree with it, even if it isn't true. And they will tell them whatever they need to get them to agree to this. I don't know if any of you have had the opportunity to watch the limited series When They See Us, but it was. Please take the time to watch that series. Please take the time. But the fact that police are able to lie to children and to basically get them to admit to things that they potentially have not done, it's a horrible thing. What we would like to do is not just end the ability of police from lying to children. We would also like to increase. So in 2020, the bill was changed, and so police have to notify a child's parent before they interrogate them. But we would like to expand that to say that children have that right to counsel, that they are able to have a consultation with an attorney before they are interrogated, or that interrogation happens in the presence of counsel. That would be even better. But not only do you not lie to children, but they have the right to counsel before they are asked questions. And then finally, we also like to eliminate the criminal penalties associated with young folks in possession of marijuana. We do not condone youth using any controlled substance, any drug. But at the same time, if marijuana is now legalized, we should not create a new crime for kids in the process. We need to recognize that if a child is using marijuana, that there is a reason, and we ought to address the reason and not the symptom. And so ultimately, we are looking to ensure that children have the opportunity to be children and to get the direction that they need, the rehabilitation that they need, the support that they need, and not instead being criminalized. And finally, there are pieces of legislation that we are not carrying or prioritize, but we will indeed support. One of those, most importantly, expanding the use of credible messengers in schools so that we don't rely so heavily on police. So credible messengers, those are individuals who are, number one, from the communities that children live in, who have experienced some of the traumas, who have been in trouble and are now, doing good things in their lives and are willing to support young people. Those are the folks that we want to have access to our children in school so that they can be there to support them and to show them how to deal with their stresses and even be liaisons to some of the other services in schools that some children may not take advantage of because they do not feel an affinity towards perhaps the providers of those services. And so we need to make sure that we are creating space for every child to feel supported by those that look like them, by those that understand them, and that who can then create pathways to other supports and opportunities for our young people. And we want to continue to support Senator Morrissey's work to end the use of solitary confinement and repealing all mandatory minimum sentences in Virginia. I know that was a lot. That was a lot, but I hope that we can work together to make sure that we are indeed supporting young people, giving them what they need to be successful without criminalizing them, and transforming our system of justice so that it is one that rehabilitates you rather than ushers them into the adult system.
Okay, thank you, Valerie. Woo, what a lot of information. Thank you so much. Wow, you do know your stuff. So I'm going to open it up to questions. Do people have questions to ask Valerie? I've got some, but I hate to be the, well, yes.
Yeah, thank you so much for everybody. It's just raising this awareness is so important. I'm so glad to be on this call. Wanted to ask a little bit more since you ended on the topic of solitary confinement. Can you share just some reflections on what the youth experience in solitary confinement? And I say that informed by a recent editorial in the Washington Post that very much surprised me. I don't know if you're aware of this. An incarcerated inmate wrote to the Washington Post about how during COVID, solitary confinement was actually a helpful situation for him, and went on to say some other things. So I'm not implying that that's the case here, but I just wanted to for you all to provide a picture of what that's like for our young people and probably how isolating it is, but just wanted to hear a little bit more about that topic. Thank you.
Sure. I'll start, and then Lauren, if you want to follow up as well, that would be great. So I know that for a while, especially at the very beginning of the pandemic, young folks were locked in their cells for 23 hours a day. And then they had that 1 hour that they were able to come out to shower, to have communication with family members via phone, and to have what's called large muscle motor movement. And, that's supposed to be outside, but it was happening within the facilities and within their units at that. And I know that there's a particular young man that we had the opportunity to work with his family, or the family members were attending that weekly call that I was talking about earlier. And this young man was not handling it well at all. But I mean, that was the case for many young people, that they don't do well with isolation. We all need human contact. And, when we're talking about a young mind, there's a greater need for support, for love, for, just knowing that there are others there for you. And this young man began to talk quite honestly. He sounded as if he were suicidal. And so that's a problem. We cannot allow children to spend 23 hours a day confined to a room. And then, there were other young folks who shared with family members that they weren't being told whether or not they had been exposed to the virus. It's only when they were tested that was their indicator that they must have come in contact with someone who had the virus, because testing, of course, was only being administered to those who had potentially come into contact with someone who had the virus. And so can you imagine how frightening that is? You won't tell me, but you'll come and you'll test me. And, that's just a horrible way to live. I'm locked in my room. or locked in my cell, and then potentially I'm tested, and then I'm locked in my room, and I'm out, but very, very sparingly. And then their education was coming in packets, and the packets weren't always age appropriate or grade level appropriate. And so, gosh, we've just really heard from some really frustrated parents, some frustrated young people, and that is the experience that I have come to understand young people are having. But Lauren, I would love to just turn it over to you to answer more fully.
I would really echo everything you said, Valerie. We also heard from several youth from our choir. One of the things that we do in relationship with young people at Bon Air is we run a gospel choir. We are invited to start a gospel choir with them. So that's one of our points of entry, is singing and building community. And several of the youth wrote to us, particularly during the time of COVID, and shared deep depression because of the extreme isolation of being shut in 23 hours a day. And they're in pods of 15 youth, and they have an individual cell, which is a cement room with a solid door, and so they're locked in the cement small cell for 23 hours a day. And like Valerie said, there's that 1 hour, and there are only, maybe 2 phones for 15 young people to call their moms and their dads and their grandparents in that 1 hour of time. And so a lot of our families did not hear from their young people for months. The kids did not know what was going on at home. Were their families alive? They may have heard that somebody was in the hospital with COVID, and there wasn't any way to know and for them to get regular information. And so it was, particularly during COVID, it has been a very, very traumatic time for our young people. They've been separated from, normally at Bon Air, they have classes where they have a school, they move across the campus, they mix with other youth throughout the facility. They have educational opportunities, group enrichment, art, music, all sorts of programming as an additional, as well as support and therapy. And they've just been on lockdown this whole time, limited to the 15 people and very limited access to all of those resources of education and therapy, and not having any extra. I don't know if Ashley, I know you're on the call, if you wanted to share anything.
Yeah, can y'all hear me okay?
Yes.
Can y'all hear me? Okay,
Yes.
okay. Yeah, I would just, again, highlight or just lift up what Valerie and Lauren said. I was thinking specifically about some of the kids that we have been in relationship with, and I can't think of a single one who didn't experience significant deterioration in their mental health from the extended period of solitary confinement during COVID. One in particular, young man who actually, was supposed to be released, and he was released, but there was a long delay in his release plan. Bon Air actually released a number of young people during COVID to try to both kind of acknowledge that not all of these children needed to be incarcerated, and to deal with COVID. So he was released, but I think that what he and his family have said is that the impact of that time and having no access to your support system, being in an incredibly traumatic environment, the staff is dealing with trauma also at the same time, was so challenging and emotionally horrific for him, that once he got out and still did not have access to the resources that he needed, he was in a really vulnerable place and made some decisions that maybe he wouldn't have otherwise made, and now he is reincarcerated as an adult. And so that points back to what Valerie was talking about earlier, that this youth incarceration system is highly regenerative and puts these kids in situations where they're just kind of being shuttled from the youth system to the adult system. And I do think that sometimes the things that the system see, or the system codes as protective for the youth, winds up actually just feeding more and more kids into the adult system.
I did see a question in the chat that we haven't addressed from Roseanne. What other advocacy organizations are you partnering with? What is your strategy to be heard? And do you have key legislators that are interested in addressing at least parts of your agenda? What prospects do you see for progress next session? So I think this was directed to Valerie during her comments.
Okay, so with respect to transferring the Department of Juvenile Justice to the Health Secretary, we are partnering with the University of Richmond, with Virginia Commonwealth University, with members literally of the respective agencies that are providing services to children, both in the Department of Juvenile Justice and in Health and Human Resources. We're partnering with the Democratic Teen Caucus and with several other advocacy organizations, all who recognize the need to treat children as children, and that there is indeed a health issue at stake when we are talking about children from communities that are dealing with such lack. We have the support of several legislators. My legislative coordinator has been visiting with several legislators and sharing the agenda, and we haven't heard anyone say they don't understand the reasoning. So I talked about OJJDP, and they require that every state have an advisory council. And I had the opportunity to present to that group. And that is a group of judges and, as I was sharing earlier, agencies that provide services to children, public defender offices, and just the full gamut of who provides services to children are represented in this group. And resoundingly, they are in support of that transition and recognize the need to acknowledge that it is a health crisis rather than a public safety one. And so we're really excited about that. And the transferring of the department, or the building of small facilities, or the renovation of small spaces rather than large prisons, it's also supported again by several organizations. I could go down the list of all of those that are in support. Mom's Demand Action, the Virginia Violence Coalition, the Virginia Gun Violence Coalition. Oh goodness, Art 180, again, VCU, U of R, public defender offices. Gosh, so many are in support, and that's legislators as well. Where we stalled last year was in the Appropriations Committee. And so the price tag that was placed on building smaller facilities or renovating smaller facilities that was the problem. It wasn't that folks didn't understand and believe that it was the appropriate thing to do. It was how much the department said that it would cost. But we are even looking to push back against that, because we aren't saying children who have been removed from home for services should have a separate pot of money than children who are at home. You know, the transformation process that Department of Juvenile Justice has been under created this whole framework once Beaumont was closed that said, the $40 million that we saved by closing that large prison, we're going to create a whole continuum of services, and we'll just kind of allow it to regenerate itself. And we're saying those are all youth serving services, right? Whether a child is receiving services at home or whether a child is receiving services inside of a facility, we should not have separate pots of money, but one system that serves all children. And being able to separate the two has created this false increase in what it would cost to provide this level of services to children, and that we are willing to spend so much on incarceration and so little on education and so little on all of the supports that would keep kids out of the adult system. It's a problem anyway. I don't believe in the fiscal argument. I don't think it's an effective one, because we should not put a price tag on the support of children, on the positive and the success of children. We ought to be willing to pour all that we can, because when we are willing to support a child, we are going to create a well-adjusted adult who is going to be able to pour back into the economy of a community. So, and as far as all of the others, we're running short on time, but I would be willing to have a more deep conversation with anyone who wants to kind of discuss any of those other legislative pieces, but those are our top two priorities.
Valerie, we are running short on time, but I don't want to let you go before we've had a chance to talk about what you want us to do. So some of us are representing churches, I know, the Presbytery, I'm not sure who else is on this call, but what do you want to see happen?
Well, we are going to be, once we have a report drafted by Commonwealth VCU and by University of Richmond, we're doing research right now. And once that report is drafted, we want to be able to count on all of our partners that you would take this information and not just ingest it yourself, but then share it with your legislators. Let folks know that you are in support of supporting children. Let folks know that you are indeed saying, I don't believe that children should be treated punitively, but they should be treated in a way that rehabilitates them, allows them to have what they need. So as we share information, please go to our website, sign up to receive updates. And as we have information and we make it available, we're hoping that you will avail yourselves, that you will lobby with us during session, and that you will indeed just be a support for our youth.
Are there certain legislators that we should be targeting that you can think of?
Yes, the House of Appropriations. Oh, House Appropriations. What's his name? Luke Torian. If you have a relationship with Luke Torian, please. Our bill wasn't even heard in appropriations. And so we really need for folks that have those relationships to reach out and encourage these legislators in appropriations, particularly, to have an open mind and be willing to have conversations and recognize that this is possible. We need to do these things.
How about moving responsibility from
moving the Department of Juvenile Justice? That's probably going to go to rules and courts. We have been trying to figure out exactly where things will land, but you know how that goes.
Right. Yeah, I know we don't have bills yet, so we can't talk about bill numbers.
Right. But I will share them as soon as we do have them.
Okay. It is 3:00. I was going to try to keep this to 3:15 as the latest that we went. Are there any other questions? Well, I feel like I'd be remiss if I didn't mention a couple more things about solitary confinement that you can find on Virginia Interfaith Center's webpage, by the way. But right now, there are more than 7,000, or this past year, more than 7,000 people have been incarcerated in Virginia's prisons in solitary confinement, and that doesn't include youth. So that's a hefty number. And I did find out, too, that in New Jersey and New York, they have really limited the use of solitary confinement to really people who are might hurt themselves or other people. So that shows you that we have some work to do, I think. And we can do it since other states have done that. Any other questions?
I have a quick question. To dovetail, Gailey, from your question about what churches can do. I know there's some churches that I'm familiar with in Charlottesville that support the women's prison with supplies and things that are on their list to give. Would that relate to your work or the needs there in the juvenile prison?
I would say absolutely. Go ahead, Laura.
Yeah, I would say that that's wonderful to support the women there. I think that's a great ministry. We also reach out in similar ways to the youth at Bon Air through the Voices of Jubilee. So to support providing toiletries and books and school supplies for the young people who are there. And we'd welcome churches to be part of that with us. We do a big Christmas drive where we give Christmas gift supplies to all the youth. And we do the same a couple times a year as a way to help them know that they are not forgotten in that space.
Lauren, maybe we could touch base after this and you can tell me how to do that.
Yeah, absolutely.
All righty.
I'll put our webpage up too if anybody wants to sign up.
Can I add one other thing to our list, Lauren?
Yeah.
So we have a number of kids that have moved on to DOC, and they're still very young. And again, we can put this on our website, but every communication in DOC, this is a separate legislative issue, but every communication at DOC is monetized. So we're paying for all the pastoral care that we're doing through emails. They're paying to send emails, to make phone calls to their families. So that's another area where, we're working to figure out how churches could support, to kind of lift that burden off of communities and off of incarcerated folks as well. So we'd love for folks to look for that as well.
Just so you know, if you haven't read the comment or the chat thing, Lauren Ramseur was talking about how to find out more about how your church can help her church, Voices of Jubilee. You can go to the website www.voicesofjubilee.org. Are there any other questions? Okay, well, I'm ready to end this thing. Then Valerie, we thank you for all the information that you shared with us. And I am so rich from this experience. So, and Lauren, thank you for your continued ministry along with Ashley. Both of you, thank you for your work with Voices of Jubilee. And I hope at some point you'll be able to re-enter the Bon Air Correctional Center so that you can work with those young men. I will close this out with prayer. Yeah. I will close this out with prayer. Let us pray. Dear Holy One, we thank you for this opportunity to be together. We thank you for the good work of your servants, Valerie and Lauren and Ashley. Continue to bless all of us as we go about your work in the world. This we ask through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. All right, go in peace.